Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And don't forget to go and get yourself that lovely, lovely drink, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I don't know why I applied for a job at the funeral home, but I did. I had taken a year off between school and university. Some would say it was a year's break, but that wasn't entirely true. It was more about discovering exactly what it was I wanted to do with my life. It had been my father's archetype conceptualization for me to take a year or two off. Indeed, if my father could have begun his life all over again, he would have become an engineer and not a lawyer. When he left school, he had been expeditiously encouraged to make resolutely critical life-affirming decisions in regards to his own career by both of his parents, without procuring much-needed time for soulful contemplation or ponderous deliberation. Ostensibly, to this very day, he had bitterly resented having been acrimoniously pushed around by his well-meaning, injudicious parents, and having decisions made on his own behalf, based on the fact that he couldn't make up his wavering mind, that was clouded by doubt and indecision at the time. His father had said, "Go into law, son. It'll stand you in excellent stead. In my opinion, it's your safest and wisest option." Not for a moment did they consider my father's personal happiness, or whether the road he would ultimately choose would offer him any long-term fulfillment or accomplished gratification. For sadly in those days, these kind of luxurious considerations were none and void, as people concerned themselves with the crucial necessities of providing for their families, and whether you derived contented satisfaction for your job or not was neither relevant or significant, as all that mattered was returning home with a pay package. All his parents could consider was whether my father would be able to provide for their grandchildren a satisfactory lifestyle one day. Never a day went by in my father's life that he didn't ruefully regret being a lawyer. I believe in me he saw his younger self caught up in the snare of ambivalent confusion. My father wanted to rescue me from the hodgepodge of a muddy sinkhole, as there is only one rehabilitation for indecision, and that is a plethora of time. Time to reflect on who you are, and to ponderously consider what life path you would like to embark upon. Time is a precious treasured gift that my father's parents never afforded him. "You're a young man," my father told me. "You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't have to rush into doing a degree. I don't want you making the grievous, regretful mistakes I made. So if you need to sit on your laurels for a couple of years before you make any definitive, unambiguous decisions, then so be it. With your excellent grades, you can pretty much choose your vocation in life, as any university would accept you gladly. But there is no need to hurry. Take your time, son. Lots of people take a gap year or two. Why shouldn't you? If you ask me, it's a great idea." I'm so glad I listened to my dad's informative, noteworthy, sagacious advice and worldly wisdom. In truth, I had no clue, nor personalised illumination, of what I actually wanted to do long-term with my life. But I did have one illustrious dream, however, and that was to go on a road trip around America on the back of a Harley Davidson. A wistful idea in the beginning that had significantly distressed my mother quite profoundly, who did not like the idea of my driving on long, lonely country roads on the back of my Harley Davidson. In truth, country roads are never a problem with a motorbike. It's the congested roads in the city you need to worry about, where reckless drivers have no consideration for the more vulnerable road users. "What are you doing buying our son a motorbike? For goodness sake! Why not a car? Forget about our son being obliviously clueless about what he actually wants to do with his life. Don't you get it? He won't have a life if he drives around in a Harley Davidson all the time. He'll be dead. Do you know how many people die in motorbike accidents every year? It's ludicrously insane. My father looked frustrated, with my nannyish mother's infuriating comments that certainly seemed to rattle his cage. I could see the annoyed expression developing in his eyes. He loathed it when my mother became punctiliously overprotective towards me and my younger brother Hank. Sometimes it made him indignant, as it reminded him of the fleeting glances of a past when he had felt like a henpecked young man. He pipes, "When I was Malcolm's age, I wanted a motorbike just like Malcolm does, more than anything in the world, if you must know. Much like him, I was yearning to undertake an adventurous road trip on my own, exploring uncharted parts of America. My parents hastily put a spanner in the works, stopping that dream from growing any wings, coming into fruition, for my dream was their quintessential nightmare. My aspirations were crushed, obliterated, completely stamped out, like you might squash an insect under your boot. I resented my folks for that. I rarely did. Both my parents allowed their thoughts to be dictated and governed by an unavailing fear. It impetuously ruled their lives with an oppressive iron rod. It imprudently dominated every decision they ever made concerning me and my brother. It egregiously robbed our family of experiencing the rich vibrancy and fullness of life. Me and my brother both wanted to go to Africa at one time, but they were objectionably afraid that we would be bitten by a mosquito and contract malaria, despite the fact that you can take anti-malaria tablets to redeem the problem. That seemed irrelevant to them. They worried that if we didn't get a degree, we wouldn't be able to provide for our families. If we drove motorbikes, we would be killed. If I went camping, we might be obliterated from the face of the earth by a weirdo with a sawn-off shotgun, and both buried in the woods together. Everything that me and my brother ever wanted to do was quashed under their feet because of the potential risks it engaged. We tried to tell our parents that everything in life involves risks, but would they listen? No, not a chance. They genuinely thought they knew better than us. So at best our lives were dull. At the worst, the inability to engage in an activity that involved perilous risk with our friends meant that there were limitations on our lives that made us feel like birds with clipped wings. We weren't allowed to do the things other boys our age did, like climb trees or swim in ponds, which is second nature to a boy. It would make me feel so incensed. I resented them so much for infringing and imposing their will on our lives. When my dad died by slipping over a can of baked beans and hitting the kitchen countertop with his head so hard that he finally cracked his skull open, I rested my case with my mother. Despite all their protective measures over the years, against all odds, a random accident at home had killed him. It was after my father died my mother suddenly woke up, realizing I'd been right all along, as a fortuitous accident could happen anywhere, even at home. Do you know, a year after my father died, my mother jumped out of an aeroplane with a parachute. She never looked back after that. Since then, she's been taking precarious risks, and she's never felt more alive. She even apologized to me for the fearful way she treated me and my brother when we were growing up, like fragile pieces of china that could so easily break. You do make a valid point, said my mother. Our lives are never without risk. But it's news to me that your dad slipped over a baked bean can. You never told me that, nor did your mother. Well, it's not something my mother likes to discuss. It's a subject that is embarrassingly brushed under the carpet. But more to the point, sweetheart, no child of ours is going to live under a banner of fear. Never. Do you understand that? Everything in our lives engages some kind of risk. Nothing in life is without risk. Do you know how many people die in their homes every year from common household accidents? We can't wrap our son up in cotton wool, Hilda. And if he wants a motorbike,
He's going to have one. I am sure Malcolm will be responsible with his vehicle, but stopping him from riding a bike based on fear is utterly ridiculous. If he wants to bike around America, I think it's a wonderful idea. Who are we to stop him? I believe it is in this adventure and exploration that he will find himself.
My father always had a marvellous way of helping my mother come to her senses and see reason. So soon she was on board with the idea of my getting a Harley Davidson. As you can imagine, I was absolutely thrilled. I was now 6 months into my solo adventure around America and had decided to spend time in a pretty town outside of Portland, where I was living in a student digs for a short while. I wanted a brief break from being out on the open road, as although it was exhilarating, I desired a permanent base for just a short while. I decided I needed extra money beyond my parents' monthly allowances, and I learnt there was a job going at a funeral home, so off I went for the interview. The funeral home was like a long L-shaped double-storey home. The top story of this house, with its own separate entrance, belonged to the family that owned the funeral home, so the upstairs living quarters was devoted to family living, while the bottom floor of this funeral home, with its private entrance, was the business, where there were reception areas, consulting rooms, offices, toilet cubicles, a kitchen, showrooms for coffins and urns, an embalming room, and then a cold room for the storage of dead bodies. On the outside, the funeral home presented itself as a normal, attractive home, only it was enormous in girth and size. A couple of the town churches were situated in close proximity to the funeral home, along with an extensive graveyard where many of the locals were buried. It was a pretty graveyard, with black wrought iron gates, viridescent green fields, scattered with tall, imposing oak trees. On the day I arrived at the funeral home for my interview, I realised with bitter disappointment that there were other young men applying for the same position, and not being a local boy certainly made my chances of acquiring this position seem significantly slimmer. Well, so I thought. I parked my Harley Davidson outside the main stone entrance under the shade of a large oak tree. There were large flower pots bursting with colourful springtime displays fringing the edges of the stone pathway. The reception area was warm, convivial and inviting, with comfortable settees and couches, and a reception desk where a young female receptionist sat, who eventually led me into a conference room where I had my interview with a lady called June Pumwell, whom was the owner of this home. As I sat down on the upholstered chair opposite her, she studied me judiciously through her brown, beady eyes. "Why do you want to work at a funeral home?" she asks me. I shrug my shoulders. I decide to be perfectly honest with her. "It's simple. I need the money." "How do you feel about working with dead bodies?" she asks me, studying me curiously, to look for any awkward twitching that might suggest some uncertainty on my part. For a second, the question stings me like a hive of hornets. I was applying for a job in a funeral home. I had no comprehension I'd actually be working with dead bodies hands-on. I had been under the false impression it would be more of an administrative office job. More fool me. "Well, when you're dead, I say in a nonchalant way. I mean, I really wanted this job, so I wasn't going to let a few dead bodies rattle my cage. "I only ask because some people are squeamish about working with the dead. Do you know what the job involves?" "Not exactly. I'd appreciate it if you would tell me." "Well, when you work in my funeral home, which is our family business, it's different to other kinds of businesses because it's a family business. So you'll be expected to perform all kinds of jobs. It's like we work together as a team, with all hands on deck, and using your initiative is of pivotal importance. You might need to speak to a grieving person to give them moral support, sometimes answer the telephone, talk about the different packages we have on offer, even showcase some of the coffins to prospective clients. Then on the days you're assigned to work night shift, you might be expected to receive a delivery of a corpse in the middle of the night, shortly after a patient has died. Even at night you'll be expected to answer the telephone and watch the premises, rather like a night watchman. And then if one of our drivers delivers a gurney with a corpse on it, you'll have to help them put it into cold storage. Do you think it's something you could possibly do?" "I don't see why not. I mean, how hard can it be?" I say. Good, you've got a very positive attitude. Let me show you around the place. I follow her lead while she shows me the vast selection of coffins on display, along with a list of all the available packages for customers to choose from. Some of the coffins are so pretentiously ornate. Some can be personally designed to align with your dream coffin, like being buried in a Thomas the Tank Engine coffin, as the options are literally endless, while others are very basic, and then there are supersized coffins for the morbidly obese. We never used to have coffins this size, she tells me, but with the increase in obesity, some people cannot fit into a regular-sized coffin. I am then shown into the embalming room, and finally into the cold storage room, where the deceased bodies are fastidiously stored. June pulls some of the dead bodies on their refrigeration trays out. They all seem to have tags on their feet, but nothing that she shows me is distressing. It's what it is, a few dead bodies on trays. I can live with that. It's all benign to me. I seem to have passed the test with flying colours, as I notice June is studying my face, looking for any signs of weakness, when she pulls out the dead corpses to see my reaction. She seems heartily relieved and pleasantly surprised. I thought you might be the squeamish type, but I can see I'm wrong about that. You'll do nicely, she says. You can start the job tomorrow working on night shift for the first couple of nights, where you will answer the phone and receive any deceased bodies requiring refrigeration during the night. Do you think you can do that?
Of course. It sounds like a doddle. I mean, how hard can it be? I say.
The following evening, I arrive for the night shift at the funeral home. I was asked to bring along with me a packed evening meal, as well as a book to read, to while away the long, lonely hours. I'd also like you to regularly patrol the premises, June had told me. We had a break-in once. Over a dozen coffins were actually stolen, so you need to keep your eye on everything. If you have any problems, you just press this buzzer over here, and it will connect with our security firm. They'll be on the scene in a tick. They're very efficient, and an armed security unit. I live upstairs with my family, so I prefer not to be disturbed. But in emergency situations, this bell over here rings through to the house, so then you can contact me. I thanked June and sat at the reception desk for a long while, doing nothing but twiddling my fingers. Suddenly, the piercing sound of the phone shatters the peaceful silence. I answer the call.
Hello? White Dove's Funeral Home. How can I help you?
A muffled woman's voice engages my attention at the other end of the line. Hello, it's Tina Marlowe speaking. I'm just checking to see if my husband, Bob Marlowe, is safely resting in cold storage. In this dreadful heat wave, I don't want him to start decomposing. I'm terribly concerned. Could you please check on him for me?
Hold on a moment, ma'am, I said, tapping into the computer. You say your name is Tina Marlowe, is that right?
That's right. I scanned the records for a recently delivered corpse to the funeral home, but there is no record of a Bob Marlowe's body being delivered to our home.
Sorry, madam. Your husband's body has not arrived at the funeral home yet. I have no record of us being informed to pick up his body, or that we're expected a delivery of any kind.
The woman becomes agitated. But are you sure? There has to be some confusion.
Pretty much, madam. If it's not registered in the computer, it hasn't been checked in. Where did your husband die? I ask.
The woman responds, At St. Bartholomew's nursing home. He died of a stroke at 4:30 this afternoon. I don't want to trouble you, but I'd truly appreciate it if you could please check the refrigeration units urgently to see if my husband's corpse is there. It's dreadfully important. I have to have peace of mind. I rarely do. I can't rest if his body is decomposing somewhere. You do hear the most dreadful stories.
Ma'am, if he's not registered in the computer, he certainly shouldn't be in cold storage. It appears he hasn't been delivered to our funeral home.
The woman seems insistent. There has to be an oversight. There must be a mistake somewhere down the line. Please will you check the refrigeration units at once to see if he's there, she begs me. I know the drivers are supposed to have dropped him off ages ago. It was definitely the White Dove Funeral Home. Generations of our family have used your services. If my husband starts decomposing, I don't know what I'm going to do. The very thought, it turns my stomach green. You have to help me. I'm begging you. This is my husband we're talking about. How would you feel if it was your loved one?
lying somewhere decomposing rapidly in this dreadful heat. Please don't get upset, madam. I will take a look for you to put your mind at rest. But I do have to warn you, Mrs. Marlowe. I'm quite sure he won't be there. I don't believe his body has been collected yet. I'll be so grateful. I can't tell you how grateful I will be. Thank you so much, the woman says. This is a family business, I think to myself. I suppose it is possible that there could be an oversight. I was new to this line of work, and in any business mistakes invariably happen. I decided to go and check the cold storage room. I mean, what harm could it do? There was an incredibly distressed woman at the end of the phone, concerned about her husband's corpse. If I could offer her a measure of reassurance, it might put an end to this inexplicable, enigmatic mystery. So I ventured towards the cold storage room, with a degree of trepidation, I don't mind admitting. It was getting dark in the funeral home at this time, but it wasn't dark enough to require a torch. But when I entered the cold storage room, it was as if something felt exceedingly off. I've never been a superstitious person who believed in ghosts or ghoulies, but something was really strange about the energy in the cold storage room. It sent chills running down my spine. I had been in this cold storage facility during the day before, and beyond the sterile scent of disinfectant that infused the air with a carbolic smell, it had been rather inoffensive and mediocre, much like any other middle-of-the-road, nondescript room. Now I felt as if I wasn't alone, as if I was being watched by unseen eyes. I hastily went to the refrigeration unit, pulling out one corpse after another, checking the labels on their toes. But none of the labels had Bob Marlowe's name attached to them. I was beginning to significantly panic, as the air in the cold storage room seemed to close in on me, becoming stiflingly claustrophobic, as if I was standing in a confined space where there wasn't much room to breathe or move. I felt exactly like that. The room felt treacherously heavy and thick, cloyingly suffocating, and the temperature plummeted so that it became incredibly cold, and a feeling of being watched became so intense that my heart pounded rapidly in my chest like a thunderous booming drum. I began to feel very nervous and unsteady on my feet. What the hell was the matter with me? I felt too intimidated to look behind me. I was certain I could feel a presence, unless my imagination was playing tricks on me, of course. How I wished the latter was indeed the case, but I wasn't sure about that. As I ran out of the cold storage unit, it feels as if silken cobwebs are brushing against my face, but there is nothing there. I returned to the reception area, quickly retrieving the telephone that is incongruously dangling over the edge of the desk. How did it get like this? I hadn't left it like that. It must have fallen, I tell myself. I quickly answer the telephone. "Hello, Mrs. Marlowe, are you there?" "Hello? Hello?" But there is no answer. Tina Marlowe's voice isn't there. There's a static sound at the end of the phone, like when a TV goes on the blink. My forehead furrows in a series of puzzle lines. That's odd, I think, replacing the phone back on the receiver. Maybe she just hung up. Perhaps she'll call back later. I put the phone down and phone up St. Bartholomew's nursing home. "St. Bartholomew's, how can I help you?" came the female voice at the end of the line. "Hello, I'm phoning from White Dove's funeral home concerning a deceased patient of yours, Bob Marlowe, who died at 4:30 this afternoon. I want to check if his deceased body has been collected yet. His wife informs me they're using our services. She's very concerned about getting him into cold storage as quickly as possible, given the current heat wave. She's worried about rapid decomposition." There's a long pause at the end of the phone. "Bob Marlowe, did you say?" sounded the woman's almost strangled voice. "But Bob Marlowe isn't dead." "As it happens, his wife is standing here in reception with me. I've been talking to her for the last 20 minutes about how to prune roses. There must be some misunderstanding. Bob Marlowe is very much alive. He suffers from Alzheimer's, but I saw him 5 minutes ago when he returned from dinner." "I'm dreadfully sorry for troubling you, I say." That was exceedingly weird, I think, when I put down the telephone. I wasn't going to allow a strange phone call to unsettle me, but I'm not going to kid. I was relieved when my shift was over, and I decided that I would avoid that cold storage room like the plague. The next evening, when I arrived at the funeral home for the evening shift, no sooner had I sat down on the upholstered chair,
and the phone begins to ring. It literally becomes a reenactment of the previous day being replayed all over again, like Groundhog Day, which was chilling to say the least. I could hardly believe it. It was the same woman from last night. She was phoning me again. Was this some kind of macabre hoax, I wondered? Was someone winding me up, having a laugh at my expense? It would seem so. Hello, is that White Dove's funeral home?
It is indeed. How can I help you?
It's Tina Marlowe speaking, says a female voice. I'm very concerned about my husband's body, with the weather being so hot of late. I need to know that he's safely in your refrigeration unit. I'm worried about rapid decomposition of his body.
You phoned last night. I checked for you. Remember, your husband wasn't there. I also phoned St. Bartholomew's yesterday on your behalf. They said your husband wasn't dead.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about at all. You're making no sense. I never phoned you last night. My husband wasn't dead then. You must have your wires crossed. You must be confusing me with someone else. My husband died at 4:30 of a stroke at St. Bartholomew's this afternoon. Now, please will you check if he's been placed in the refrigeration unit yet? I decide to humour the woman, because her irritated, brusque tone was quite snappy. I tap into the computer. To my amazement, Bob Marlowe's name is on our records. His body has been checked in and has been picked up by our drivers. The hair at the back of my neck is standing on edge. This is incredulously bizarre. How is this even plausible, I wonder? Yes, I say, your husband's body does appear to have been checked in at about 5:30 this afternoon. Please, says the woman, please will you go and check on him? It's just, she sounds nervous, I just couldn't bear the thought of maggots crawling all over his body. You see, that happened to a friend of mine recently, when they didn't get her husband into cold storage in time. She discovered there were maggots crawling around his ears and nose. I won't rest until he's tucked away safely in the refrigeration unit. Bob would turn in his grave if he knew maggots were crawling around his body. He had a thing about worms, you know. That's why he's insistent on cremation.
I'll go and check for you, madam.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's the least I can do for a grieving woman. But why am I repeating an erroneous incident from the previous night that now seems to have become hauntingly real and reeks of the smell of déjà vu? How does that even happen? Could it have been a blip in the fragment of time played out from a future event that hadn't yet occurred in our reality, I wonder? I've heard of things like this happening to people before, but when it happens to you, it's dauntingly surreal. I amble towards the cold storage units, trying to abandon the former airy feelings I'd experienced the previous evening, that are clinging to me like tight, restricted, unwanted garments that I don't want to be wearing. I clandestinely enter the room. I refuse to live in fear, I tell myself. My father's absolutely right about that. I wasn't going to let an outlandish, unfathomable feeling get the better of me. I feel relief. The room appears innocuously benign. The floors look polished, gleamingly clean. Everything is sterile. The air is infused with the stench of a powerful disinfectant that almost burns my nostrils and the back of my throat. The blind in the room is flapping backwards and forwards, banging against the windows, but it's done that before, so I'm not perturbed. I walk over to the various units and pull out the trays of dead bodies, and finally I discover a tobe with Bob Marlowe's name attached to it. Thank God, I think, he's here. I close the refrigeration unit, and in a trice the room suddenly becomes inauspiciously cold. So cold, in fact, that I can see my vaporous breath before my face. I glance briefly around the room. The airy, spooky, bodeful feeling from the previous night returns. I sense I'm not alone. Something is watching me. I feel very afraid. My heart is pounding violently in my chest. I'm sweating. My breath becomes deep and rapid. And like a terrified rabbit being pursued by a fox, I hightail it back to the reception area as fast as I can, not daring to look behind me. But when I run, once again I feel as if I'm running through cobwebs that are brushing against my face. But there's nothing there. It's a creepy experience. I'm out of breath when I finally answer the phone.
Hello, Mrs. Marlowe. Miss Marlowe, are you there?
Yes, I am, says the woman. Is his body there?
Yes, he's there, Mrs. Marlowe.
Oh, what a relief! I can't thank you enough.
Oh dear, she says suddenly. She gives me the impression that something else is bothering her. Is there a problem, Mrs. Marlowe? It's just occurred to me. What if my husband's glasses are still on his body? You know, he never sleeps with his glasses on. I'm worried they never removed them. I'm really sorry to put you out, but please could you go and check for me? You want me to go and check that your husband's glasses have been removed from his body? Yes, please, if it's not too much trouble, but I really don't want him lying in cold storage with his glasses on. He'd hate that. He never wanted to fall asleep with his glasses on. I'm quite sure, Mrs. Marlowe, that they removed your husband's glasses. I think it's standard procedure to do that. I need you to check. I don't mean to be so demanding, but I haven't got his glasses here with me. I've got his wedding band. They did give me that, but I think they forgot to remove his glasses. I'm sure they did. Please, will you check? All right, I'll go and check for you. The idea of returning to that hostile cold room again was giving me the heebie-jeebies, but I needed to get a grip. The poor woman was grieving. It was important to put her mind at rest, for goodness sake. That was what any decent, self-respecting, compassionate human being would do in the circumstances. I mean, how hard could it be just to check if the man is wearing his glasses, and if he is, just to remove them? It would only take a couple of minutes, surely. Even during my night watchman duties, I barely ever looked into the cold room. The place always unsettled me. As I enter the room, it still feels cold, but I quickly race towards the tray that contains Bob Marlowe's corpse, and when I pull it out, it is with great reluctance that I unveil the head area. A man's vacant dead body, minus the glasses, is staring back at me. I can see the head clearly. He looks like a mannequin. I'm surprised they didn't even bother to close his eyes after death. I quickly cover the face up and push the tray back into its slot, when once again I get this overwhelmingly uneasy feeling that I'm being watched, and I'm not alone. I see a swirling, smoky white mist in one corner of the room. I'm freaked out. I race out of the room so fast, wondering what the hell that was, but wisely choosing not to dwell on the strange anomaly. I answer the phone. Mrs. Marlowe, are you there? Oh, hello, dear. I'm sorry I put you to so much trouble. I've actually got Bob's glasses in this plastic container. They're so opaque, I didn't notice them for a moment. I'm sorry to have put you to so much trouble. No trouble at all, Mrs. Marlowe, I say, putting the phone down, feeling ever so slightly rattled. The phone rings again, but when I lift it to my ears, it's just static electricity. I look at the phone with a nonplussed expression on my face. This is my second night working at the funeral home. I'm beginning to get used to experiencing things that I cannot rationally explain. I'm still bothered about the Bob Marlowe incident. I feel unsettled as I sit down on the upholstered chair. I can hear rubber tyres on wheels outside the home, and the sound of an engine being switched off. Then there's a knock at the door. I've been expecting this call. It's the White Dove's funeral van, delivering a body on a gurney. 2 men wheel the body into cold storage and ask me what tray to use. I find them a vacant tray, and they place a tag on the man's foot, and we put it into its slot and close the door. Bloody hell, says one of the men. It's freezing cold in here. This place gives me the creeps, he says, shrugging his shoulders. I never liked this cold storage room, but I don't mind admitting this place feels rarely off-centre tonight. Something's wrong. It certainly doesn't help having a blind that rattles like this. Let's see if I can fix it. He moves over to the blind and opens and closes it as he tries to straighten it out. Who's that? He says, peering through the open blind. Who's who? I ask. That strange man wandering around your premises. He looks harmless enough, but he looks rather lost, as if he's afflicted with Alzheimer's or something. I peer through the windows. Sure enough, there's a man wearing burgundy pants and a creamy white shirt. He appears to be wandering around the front yard aimlessly of the funeral home. He looks to be elderly and rather unstable on his feet. As the 2 drivers pack up the van, I go searching for the man, but I can't see him anywhere. I watch the men driving away and leaving the premises. I sit down in the reception area, feeling rather unsettled. It's getting darker outside, so I put on the table lamp and begin to read my book that I'd brought along with me to while away the long hours. I can't seem to concentrate. Something is bothering me. That's when I hear a man's footsteps walking up and down the corridors. Click, clock, click, clock, click, clock. Hello? Is anyone there, I ask. Hello? Hello? But no one answers me. But I can hear the footsteps clearly. I cautiously follow the sound. And then they stop at the cold room, and the door opens on its own accord and closes behind itself as if someone has entered, but there was no one there. Now I feel very frightened, but I can't call anyone. I'll sound as if I've lost leave of my senses. But I do know what I saw. Something opened the door of the cold room. Suddenly the reception room becomes very cold, and then there's a knock at the door, a loud rapping sound. I haven't been notified about any deliveries to the home, so I peer through the security peephole, but no one is there. I open the door. There's a man standing in the doorway. His face looks familiar. Oh my word, it's Bob Marlowe, but he's dead. For a second I just gape in astonishment, and the man vaporizes before my eyes. It happened so fast, I almost wondered if I'd imagined things. But he had been standing there just a moment ago, larger than life, as real as you or me. By this time my body is physically shaking like a leaf. The next few days I work day shift at the funeral home, and the relief I feel is immense. I meet Mrs. Marlowe, who comes to the parlor to discuss her husband's funeral arrangements. She gives me a burgundy pair of pants and a creamy top that I recognise. These were his favourite clothes, she tells me. The clothes are distinctive. Those are the clothes I saw Bob Marlowe's ghost wearing on my night shift. I can hardly believe it. "What's wrong, dear?" said Mrs. Marlowe. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Nothing," I say. I'm not going to tell her that I've seen an old man wandering around the front yard of the funeral home wearing identical clothes, and that I'd actually met her husband's ghost. It was then in a moment I decided working at the funeral home was all too much for me, so I handed in my notice forthwith. I was stunned to realise that no one lasted long working in that funeral home, so I imagine I wasn't alone in experiencing some bizarre events that you couldn't explain. I wanted to get back on the open road on the back of my Harley Davidson again. I'd recently spoken to my father on the telephone. He'd asked me if I had made any decisions in regards to my life. I decided not to enlighten him about the bizarre events that had transpired at the funeral home. Fortunately, I hadn't told him I'd taken on such a job that had only lasted 2 minutes, because he wouldn't have been impressed about that. "Have you come to any decisions about your life and the direction you want to take for your future?" he asked me. "Well, I've decided what I don't want to do," I said. "Well, that's a good start," he said. "What don't you want to do?" "I never want to get involved in the funeral business." "You do say some bizarre things, son," my father said. It was the next day that I woke early at the crack of dawn, before the sun had even risen. I climbed on the back of my Harley Davidson, and off I went on the open road. It felt good to be out in nature again, going at such a powerful speed. There is nothing in the world more exhilarating than riding a motorbike. Of course, my mother is right about how easily your life can be snuffed out, which makes you mindfully aware of your own mortality. When I'm riding my Harley Davidson, I'm always in a permanent state of hypervigilance, which fuels the adrenaline spikes you invariably feel, and the rush of total ebullience that filters through your senses, making you feel truly alive and one with the natural world. Ostensibly in a car, you're cushioned from nature's wrath, sometimes even from the gentle rhythms of her bounteous beauty and the subtle micro-fluctuations in temperature. As I sit on my bike, I am sensitively aware of everything, to the impending threats of puddles, potholes, and even windy weather. You also learn rather quickly never to trust other drivers on the open road, for they're never thinking about you. I can feel the contours, the angles, the curves, the twist of the road beneath my legs. I can smell things when I'm travelling fast with a pronounced candour that would almost certainly bypass your senses in a car, as the air rushing past me at a tenacious speed allows me to smell the blissfully fragrant molecules of pine, fresh grass, wild flowers, and even the salty smell of the ocean. Then there are the unpleasant smells, of course, like pollution and car fumes, that I would sooner rather avoid. But I suppose you have to accept the good with the bad in everything. I have felt everything on my bike: exhilaration, terror, fear, relaxation, tranquility, and unadulterated pleasure. The first thing I realised about riding my Harley Davidson is that when you pull the throttle back, things happen very fast. In 5 seconds flat, a motorbike can reach 100 miles an hour, which gives you a fervent appreciation for the raw power between your legs. Unlike in a car, you can't just slam on the brakes. You have to navigate between accelerating, braking, traction, and lean angles. You can lean so far in turns that you almost defy gravity. And you have the assurance that a quick twist of the throttle will accelerate the bike nicely for you. There really is nothing quite like it in the entire world. If you have an eye for adventure, that is. I enjoy driving in the early morning, before the sun rises, without a solitary soul in sight. It's good to have the large country roads all to myself. It's not intimidating driving in the dark in places without any street lights. In truth, that's never bothered me in the slightest. It was still dark when I drove down the asphalt roads, surrounded by high embankments of trees that sprawled out into large wood groves. When you drive past trees in a motorbike, you can feel the temperature drop a couple of degrees. The sun had not begun to rise over the escarpment yet, but I suddenly had the urgent need to relieve myself, which obviously happens more regularly than I care to admit. I pulled my Harley Davidson to the side of the road and ambled over towards the tall imposing trees that are jiggling in the wind. In truth, I could have peed on the side of the road, as there wasn't a soul in sight, but I instinctively always pee behind a tree. So I walk behind a tree and begin to pee. I think I hear a clanging sound, but I pull out my fly and return to my motorbike, but it's nowhere to be seen. How does that happen? I have my keys in my pocket, but my motorbike has vanished. It seems that since I've worked in the funeral home, strange, unfathomable things seem to be happening to me all too frequently. What the hell is going on? How can a heavy bike like that disappear into thin air? Where has it gone? I begin to feel panicky, as I'm in a remote place off the beaten track, without my bike or a cell phone, as my cell phone is in my bike. That is when I hear this excited chattering sound. It sounds like two people engaged in an animated conversation together, in a foreign language. I move towards the strange voices. And that's when I see in the middle of the woods my Harley Davidson, surrounded by two animated Bigfoots, rubbing their hands down the sparkling metal, admiring the contours of my bike. I think they're attracted to the gleaming metal, rather like a magpie is attracted to glittering things. I watch in complete awe as the creatures talk backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, discussing my bike in detail. They don't see me, as I'm hiding behind the trees, wondering what my next move should be. Do I approach such intimidating, imposing creatures like this? They seem benevolent, but how can I be sure about that? They're so gargantuan in size, a male and female with human-looking faces, overlong arms, and burly bodies covered with long flowing dark hair. I watch in gog-eyed amazement as they continue talking together about my bike. There's lots of nodding and a plethora of effusive gestures with long arms. The language is very, very defined. These creatures are incredibly expressive, and even without understanding their language, I know they think my Harley Davidson is absolutely ace. There's no accounting for good taste, methinks. The large Bigfoot picks up my huge motorbike in his hands, as if it's a toy car, and returns it to where I'd left it last. I wait for a while, and then I return to my bike. I climb onto it, my heart thundering, and I can sense I'm being watched. And as I drive away, I glance briefly over my shoulders to see the two Bigfoots standing in the road, watching me drive off on my bike. And then they stand there, talking together again, as if they're absolutely gobsmacked. To cut a long story short, after spending 2 gap years deciding what I want to do with my life, I came to the decision I wanted to become involved with motorbikes. I ended up never going to university, as my passion for motorbikes is all-consuming, and I make a great living selling Harley Davidsons to the more discerning customer. One thing I've learnt about the world is that not all things can be explained, and strange things can happen. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.